You can see this really cool book in the background, The Art of Unix Programming. Anyone else out there married to a software developer? Let me know if you can relate. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kendra and today it's 4 degrees Fahrenheit outside. So we're doing inside activities all week. Today I wanted to take some time to reflect on some notable projects from 2023 and share with you guys some intentions that I have for the year of 2024. So if that's something you're interested in, let's jump right in. I want this video to be somewhat of a replacement for the very popular Everything I Knit in 2023 video that has been making its rounds. I know I'm late to the game as far as that's concerned, but a lot of creators out there have been making those types of videos and I've enjoyed a few, but the overwhelming feeling that I have when I watch those videos is, well, overwhelming. I think they're a great way to reflect on what I've made in the year, especially for new people who may have just stumbled upon my channel and are curious about the types of projects that I like to make. I think a video like that would be a really good introduction in that regard. But for me, I have been consistently making what I made videos on a monthly basis throughout 2023. And in those videos, I've covered everything I made. And I just don't know that I want to hash that out all over again. So instead, I wanted to share a list of my most notable projects, the projects that stand out to me that I completed in 2023. I'm not going to be holding anything up or trying it on unless I already have footage of me doing just that. But I will be putting pictures on the screen as I talk about each of these items so that you have a visual reference of what I'm talking about. So without further ado, let's get into this list. So as a general summary, I've tallied up the projects that I made this year or last year by type. So in total, I finished 25 items. I don't have a point of reference. I never bothered to count what I've made in previous years. So let's consider this a baseline for going forward. And hopefully in 2024, I do a similar video and I can see if I made more or less. 12 of those projects were garments. And of the garments, I have made 6 sweaters, 4 summer tops, and 2 dresses. 13 of the 25 items were accessories, and of those, I made 6 pairs of socks, 3 hats, 3 cowls or scarves, and 1 pair of mittens. So as far as the project highlights, I have, let's call it 6 to 8 notable projects. Think of these as like the senior year superlatives. If you've ever watched an American high school movie, then you may be familiar with the concept of awarding students most likely to succeed, most likely to become president, most likely to get arrested. I don't know if those are real ones that people would do, but it's a similar concept, really just highlighting the projects that are most notable for whatever reason to me. Let's talk about my most useful project of 2023. So this award is going to my Rye socks. This is a worsted weight sock pattern by Tin Can Knits. I did not follow the pattern as it was written. I more so used it for the stitch counts and heel flap and gusset instructions. And instead I did an all over 2x2 rib with a 1x1 rib cuff. And those have come in really good use, especially around now during the winter time as things get a lot colder. I love sleeping in those socks. They're not something I wear in boots or out and about. They're quite thick. They're not a fingering weight pair of socks that I think is most common for socks, but they are worsted weight. I use a Cascade 220 yarn, non-superwash, and yeah, I love slipping them on and getting cozy to go to sleep. Now let's talk about my most ambitious knit. This is the project that at the beginning of my journey, I never imagined I would be able to create something like this. It is intricately cabled and textured. It is knit in pieces and seamed together. And it is what I'm calling my Mount Everest knit, my super definitive ego knit of 2023. It is sort of the crowning project of the year. And it was my opportunity to prove to myself that I have developed some legitimate knitting skills over the past 3 years. And that is my pitch coat. This is a design by Emily Green. It's a worsted weight cardigan pattern, has some pockets, all over cabled, fully textured. It is knit completely flat in pieces and seamed together. And I had the time of my life making this project. It challenged me, but not really. I think with any project, especially the more complicated ones, all you have to do really is break it down into the individual steps, and it will come together in the way that the designer intends. And that was definitely the case with this project. So it overwhelmed me at the beginning of my knitting journey, but fast forward to this past year, it didn't really make me nervous, but only made me excited because I knew I could do it, and I did it. And it was great. My most creative knit of 2023. This is a project that I didn't have a pattern for. All I had was a picture online, a picture I couldn't even zoom into really. And I decided I want to make that thing. And that thing that I had the picture of was a store-bought lace style. I believe the original inspiration was crocheted, sort of beach cover-up dress, like with a halter and a really low scoop at the back. And I, for some reason, felt really confident in trying to recreate it, or at the very least to create something that is directly inspired by this piece. The inspiration piece was pricey, well over $100 if I recall correctly. And I just knew it was something that I wanted to have for my trip to Jamaica that I went on at the beginning of July in 2023. And so I put my mind to it. I did a couple of swatches. I developed a game plan on how I would tackle it, and I decided to make it. And that is my lace dress that I'll throw in a picture of here. I don't have a name for it because it's not an existing pattern. But that project was extremely successful. I didn't go into a lot of detail here on the channel. I went through the trouble of collecting a little bit of vlog footage, process footage as I was making it, but I never followed through on editing that video and releasing it here. So if that's something you're interested in seeing, I might be able to throw something together. So let me know. But yes, that is my most creative knit because all I had was a picture to go on, and I had to figure out every step of the way how I wanted to execute the project, especially because the inspiration was crochet. I'm not super good at identifying crochet stitches, and I felt way more competent as a knitter than I did a crocheter at the time. So I decided to recreate it to the best of my ability using knitting instead of crocheting, and I think it turned out great. But I definitely had to get creative in terms of how I wanted to execute the inspiration. Add to that the fact that I didn't have the yarn for it going into this project, although I knew I wanted to make it. So I decided to frog a previous finished object that I didn't get a whole lot of wear out of to create this dress. And I really had to be resourceful with what I had in that regard, because again, I was doing the no-buy of 2023, and buying yarn for a project like that would not have been within the parameters of the no-buy. So I kind of had to use what I had, and I think it just speaks to my determination to power through that project because there were a few things working against me on that one, but I did it. Now let's talk about my most impressive knit. So this project stands out as being most impressive because I think most non-knitters, especially non-knitters who don't know that I knit personally, might look at this and think, wow, that is a really pretty top. That's a really cool stitch pattern. I like the way that looks, without even registering the fact that it is potentially something handmade. So I think this piece could be easily mistaken as store-bought, which is one thing that I think makes it impressive. But the other thing is just the striking texture and pattern and the really bold color. I look at it and I am really impressed with myself personally for executing it. It's not necessarily the most complicated project I've ever attempted, but the result is really striking and effective. And this is my Rhoda sleeveless top by Irene Lynn. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say other than I'm really happy with how it turned out. I really love the fit. As far as my summer knits in 2023, this is the one that I was most satisfied with by a long shot. And I'm really happy I made it. And yeah, I would say it's the most impressive. It's not the biggest or the most intricate, but it's the piece that I look at and I think, wow, I did that. My warmest knit of 2023 is, and also my most unique project of the year, if we think about the yarn that I used. It is a mohair and merino blend. I talked about it in my previous video actually, and it is very toasty, but in the best way possible. The past few days have been negative temperatures, single digit temperatures Fahrenheit, and it has been imperative to have really warm insulating layers. And this sweater, when I first completed it, was something that I thought might be too warm. Chicago winters are known to get fairly cold, especially in January and February. But generally speaking, it is a pretty comfortable mid-20s to mid-30s range on most days. But this past week, I was really grateful to have my Westward sweater by Taylor Harris to keep me nice and toasty. The mohair and merino blend, as well as the added sort of density of the mosaic knitting, makes the fabric really sturdy, thick, and insulating. And I have found it incredibly comfortable and warm to wear over the past few days. So there's no surprise that this is my warmest just based on the yarn alone. But before this past weekend, I kind of concluded that it being so warm was a disadvantage. It was a bad thing, but it has proven to be a really useful thing in extreme temperatures. So it may not be the most versatile piece to wear. Like, I'm not going to wear this on a 40-degree day, but on a 17-degree day, on a -3-degree day, absolutely. Absolutely, this sweater is getting pulled out. My most professional knit of 2023. Now, this project is not professional in the sense that it looks store-bought, although I will argue that it does. It has some really detailed and clean finishing details. It is all over stockinette. It has a 2x2 rib trim, and I have found it really, really perfect to wear to work in the warmer months. And this is my Tonight top by Lily Kate France. Again, all of these projects I've talked about in previous videos, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. But what stands out to me is how easily this pairs with so many pieces in my work wardrobe specifically. I actually don't know that I've worn this outside of work, if I'm honest. I can't recall a time where I wore it outside of work, but I imagine it could be really potentially versatile to wear to and outside of work, but I've found it especially useful wearing it to work, which is why I am coining it my most professional knit. My most popular knit, and this project is most popular because it made the most waves, I guess, on social media. I got the most likes when I posted about this particular piece, and that is my self-drafted Christmas sweater that I knit to recreate a store-bought sweater that no longer fits me the way I want it to. And yeah, it got a lot of likes on Instagram, so I would consider it my most popular, and I think rightfully so. One of the biggest, I think, skills that has come along with me learning to knit is learning to make pieces that I want to wear. And that doesn't always have to mean something that already has a pattern written out for it, but it could be something that maybe I've seen or something that I used to have that I would like to incorporate into my wardrobe again, and using my knitting skills to execute on that and create something that I will cherish and wear forever. And this is a perfect example of a project like that. And this is the type of project that I get most excited to do. I don't do it often. So this past year I've done it twice so far, but it's something that I definitely want to do more often in the future as I get more comfortable with my knitting skills and I identify pieces out in the real world, or I reminisce on pieces that I used to have that I really loved. And I can put my knitting skills to use to bring life to those pieces again in my own wardrobe. And as those sort of instances come about and I can't find an existing knitting pattern that sort of checks all the boxes, then of course this is something that I will revisit again in a way that feels organic, not to make good content or to make posts that get a lot of likes. That's just kind of a byproduct of me doing something that really excites me and finding a group of people online that also get excited by it. So yes, that self-drafted sweater is my most popular knit of 2023. I think that was 7, and we'll cut it off there. I had a couple more on the list that I don't feel like talking about. I also wanted to take some time in this video to talk about my 2023 no-buy. A little bit of a reflection on how I think the year went of not buying yarn, and what the future of the no-buy will look like in 2024. I consider making a pros and cons list, but honestly, the pros are really the only thing that I have a list for. I cannot think of any disadvantages to doing what I did. And even the quote unquote negative things that I might attribute to my no-buy experience is really just comes down to me being impatient, me experiencing FOMO, and sort of losing sight of why I chose to do the no-buy in the first place. Going into the no-buy, my biggest intention was to eliminate this feeling of overwhelm that I was experiencing when it came to my yarn stash. This feeling of I have too much, way more than I can work through in a reasonable time. I'm purchasing yarn at a faster pace than I'm using it up, and it is contributing to mental and physical clutter in my home. And the hobby that I would like to engage in has sort of taken on a life of its own, and I just didn't feel good about it. I just did not feel good about it. And this is no judgment to anyone else who relishes in having a really big stash that brings them joy. Big stashes don't bring me joy. And that's in every pocket of my life. I don't like having a lot of stuff. I don't like clutter. I love the act of purging through things, getting rid of things that no longer serve me. And with my yarn in particular, I think was a unique situation because I didn't feel this need to purge. I did destash a few skeins at the end of 2023 that I fell out of love with, and I realized the color didn't suit me anymore. But my overwhelming feeling when it came to reducing my stash is not, let's throw all this out, I'm not gonna use it. It was more so, let's let's curtail my yarn purchasing so that I can use it, because the ultimate goal for me when I buy yarn is to knit the yarn. And I gotten to a point where most of the yarn I was purchasing, I wasn't knitting, at least not within a reasonable amount of time. So I took a step back and I evaluated what was really important to me when it came to my knitting practice. And what's important to me is using what I have. What's important to me is knitting. And although I was doing that all through 2022, my knitting was not as voluminous as my purchasing. And I wanted to balance the scales a little bit. And that's really what led to me deciding not to buy yarn for 2023. And let me be clear, it was a no buy in the sense that for the most part, I was not buying yarn, but there were some allowable exceptions. So there was some yarn that came into my stash, but in total, I think I had a net stash reduction of like 12,000, almost 12,000 yards, which I think is amazing personally. So yeah, in terms of getting rid of this overwhelming feeling when it came to my yarn stash, using what I have, and not accumulating more clutter, getting a little more organized, getting more intentional about the yarn that I do buy. I think all of those goals were met in doing my no buy of 2023. And I 100% think it was worth it. I would totally recommend it if you think that's something that would serve you. The first reflection that I wanted to share is how satisfying it has been to watch my stash shrink. At the beginning of 2023, I had like 2.5 shelves, and this cabinet I have in my office was pretty packed tight with yarn. And I had a couple shelves up in the closet of the guest bedroom with several sweater quantities vacuum sealed away, like at least 6 or 7 in the guest bedroom closet. And they were in the guest bedroom closet because they physically could not fit in the cabinet that I had purchased specifically to house my yarn. And that was one of the things that made me go, oh man, I need to reel it in. And to see that physical presence sort of dwindle over the year has been really satisfying to watch. I do still have, I think, 3 sweater quantities in my guest bedroom closet, but they could, if I rearrange some things, they could fit into the cabinet, which was not the case at the beginning of 2023. So that is a huge win. And it's just been really cool to just see it shrink. Very satisfying to watch. The second reflection is that the no buy has challenged me to delay my gratification and to base my yarn purchases on what I truly want as opposed to what I want right now. I'm sure many of you can relate to the infamous Ravelry doom scroll, akin to Instagram, where you just lose hours of your time perusing what is on offer on Ravelry, doing the good old filtered search. What kind of worsted pullover sweaters that incorporate stripes. I need a DK weight cardigan that uses less than this many yards. And in doing that, finding at least a dozen new patterns that you hadn't seen before, or maybe that you saw and you kind of forgot about that you really would love to make, but that you of course don't have the yarn for. And then it sort of morphs into doing the same with yarn shopping. What type of worsted weight yarn does Pearl Soho have? What type of worsted weight yarn does my favorite indie dyer have? And the process continues. Now, don't get me wrong, I do this all the time and I still do it even throughout my no buy. It's something that I did quite frequently, and I think it's a fun exercise to do. But before the no buy, it's something that would inevitably result in me purchasing yarn for whatever new project that I fell in love with. Even though I am physically in no position to start that project within the next month or so. And so it would go into my stash. And then I would repeat the cycle, right? And that's kind of how I got in the position that I was in. And so I still do the shopping and the window shopping for patterns and yarn and pairing patterns with yarns. And I still get a lot of joy out of that, but I stop myself when it comes to committing to a purchase. For one, I was not buying yarn. So, I mean, that was an easy cop out, like whatever, I can't buy it, but it was still really satisfying to go through the process. I feel like it was a way for me to use my creativity, use my imagination, maybe do some future Kendra knitting project planning. And that's always fun. And that's not something I ever want to not do. But it has forced me to recognize that project planning for future Kendra doesn't have to mean yarn purchasing for today Kendra. And I'm really glad that I have been able to make that distinction with myself. And the delayed gratification doesn't mean no gratification. It just means not right now. And I think that's something that we can all use a little bit more of sometimes. And that's definitely something that I needed when it came to my yarn purchasing. I've also learned a couple of things. The first thing I learned is that the longer yarn is in my stash, the more likely I am to fall out of love with it. I have a couple of sweater quantities that this sort of applies to. I remember going to Wool & Company for my birthday back in 2022, and I bought so many sweater quantities of yarn. I think I spent, this is embarrassing. I think I spent like $600 that day. And there are still yarns from that shopping spree that are in my stash as we speak. And one of those yarns is this Cascade 220, and the color, I think it's like 9696. I can't remember the name of the color, but hopefully I can pop in a picture of what that color looks like. And I'll pop in another picture of what that color looks like next to my skin. And a few months ago, I had this sort of light bulb moment where I was just like, I think I hate this yarn. I think I hate this yarn. I like it as a standalone color. Maybe something that I could incorporate into some home decor, but definitely not for a sweater, which is what I initially bought it for. Granted, I didn't have a pattern in mind when I purchased that yarn. And that's one thing that I've also learned, is that I need to have a project in mind when I'm purchasing yarn, specifically garment quantities, because depending on what type of project I end up wanting to make could determine whether I buy 10 skeins or 8 skeins. But anyway, I bought, I think, 5 skeins that I thought would be a sufficient sweaters quantity. And I realized that I was probably 1 or 2 skeins short of what I would want for a sweater in worsted weight yarn and the fit that I would want. So I pivoted and I thought, okay, it's gonna be a vest, or maybe it'll be a matching hat, gloves, and scarf set. And then I jumped back to a vest. Okay, but which vest? And I cycled through like 7 or 8 vest patterns. And every other week I was going into Ravelry and I was assigning new projects to my queue that I would use that yarn for. And then eventually I decided, eventually I realized that the reason it was so difficult for me to figure out what I wanted to make with the yarn is because I didn't want to use the yarn. I didn't like the yarn. I didn't think it looked good on my skin color. I was struggling to find any project at all that I wanted to dedicate the time that it would take to make with that yarn. And the reality is the yarn just was not exciting me. The various projects that I sort of dreamed up to use the yarn to make very much excited me. But when I thought about the actual act of casting on and knitting the piece, I immediately lost steam because I just didn't like the yarn. And that is something that when I purchased it, never occurred to me. I just thought that looks pretty in the skein and I'm going to buy it. And I just had this delayed but extreme buyer's remorse when it came to these 5 skeins that I added to my stash. And yeah, that's just really disappointing because I really wanted to love it and I just didn't. And it took me a long time to come to terms with that. And I say all that to say that that's probably the most extreme and most recent case of it. But the yarn that I destashed back in December was another situation, very similar color actually. I bought a few skeins and I couldn't commit to a project because I just didn't like the yarn. For me. I liked the yarn in the skein, like I said, but I didn't like the yarn and think that it would suit me in a garment or any type of wearable piece. And that is somewhat to do with buying yarn far in advance of me being ready to actually use it. But I think even more so, that's related to buying yarn without a project in mind, buying yarn without putting any intent or critical project planning into it, just kind of buying yarn based on vibes. And that was definitely one of those situations. And yeah, it sat in my stash and I was excited about it when I purchased it, but I also didn't have a plan when I purchased it. And over time, when I tried to come up with a plan of what to do with the yarn, it just really occurred to me that I just wasn't that into it. And that's a tough pill to swallow. And the other thing is, and this isn't something that I've learned, but more so that I have accepted, is that the yarn is always going to be there. And now there are some exceptions to this. Yarn companies go out of business. No, the indie dyer or the small business that you want to support, maybe they're having a sale, or maybe it's a limited time colorway that you fell in love with, or, you know, the list goes on and on and on and on, but there will always be another shop update. There will always be another limited time colorway that you love. And that doesn't mean you have to jump on it every time. And it certainly doesn't mean you have to jump on it right now. I'll stop rambling about the no buy and I'll leave you with these two sort of parting statements. For one, I only want to hold space and time for what I am most excited about. I think part of that is involving colors that really excite me, projects and designs that really excite me, yarns and fiber blends that really excite me, and acting on that excitement as soon as possible before I fall out of love with it. Because these feelings, they can come and go, and that's natural. But I want to lean more into the here and now and what I want to do. And I think reducing my stash has put me in the perfect position to do that. And so I'm looking forward to the day where I think, wow, I really love that pattern. And I make a Saturday afternoon of it, going to a few local yarn stores in my area and seeing what speaks to me and buying yarn for that project, coming home, swatching for that project, and starting the project. That is ideal Saturday. And my other biggest takeaway is that I have really learned to be creative with what I have. The perfect example was the knitted dress that I talked about earlier in this video. I didn't have the yarn for it, so I unraveled something I didn't wear, and it turned out to be the perfect yarn for the project. And, you know, capitalizing on more opportunities to be creative in that way, and not sort of defaulting to buying something to get what I want out of my knitting. As my stash decreases and shrinks, that is going to become an inevitability. But for example, I have at least 3 projects I can think of that I would love to frog entirely and knit the yarn into something else that suits my lifestyle better. And I think 2024 is a perfect opportunity to make those moves. You know what I mean? So that's all I have to say about 2023, the projects that are most notable and my reflections on the no buy. So let's talk about what's in store for 2024.